Words on a page, they come to life. In the world of lust and strife, couch potato Mike, he takes a dive into the stories where passions strive. From steamy nights to forbidden desire, the books he reads set hearts on fire. In his cozy realm he takes us higher. With every chapter we feel the fire. Lost in the letters, a sensual delight. Couch potato Mike takes us on flights through pages of desire and love's sweet spice. Come join the journey under the bookish lights.
Hey, what is up? Couch Potato Mike here, back in the book club for part 22 of Gabriel's Inferno by Sylvain Reynard. Sorry it's been so long, guys. Recently started a new job and just getting used to all that. I'm kicking a bit of ass at it, to be perfectly honest, but I've been reading all your comments. I hope you noticed that I always try to either respond or at the very least like them. I haven't given up, folks, so please don't give up on me. Without further ado, I want to go ahead and tell you, I always like doing that. Without further ado, making you think I'm about to start reading, but then I don't. Just remember, if you have not subscribed to this channel and you're listening to this video, please do so. And please ring that little bell icon, because that way you know exactly when the next chapter is going to come out, because I pretty much have been trying to drop them as I record them, but I'm a very, very busy man, but I'm not going to give up on you guys. Monetization is still my ultimate goal. I'm a performer, ladies and gentlemen, and that's what I want to do. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Even if you don't like it, give me a thumbs up, because I'm that kind of guy. Anyway, let's go ahead and get right into the nitty-gritty, as they say. This is part 22 of my series, and it starts off with chapter 26. When the house was shrouded in darkness, and it seemed that everyone else was fast asleep, Gabriel and Julia stood staring at one another in the kitchen. "I'm not sure you're dressed warmly enough. It's chilly out there." He gestured to her coat. "Not as cold as Toronto," she laughed. "I won't keep you outside for long. Look what I found." Gabriel held up a long, wide scarf made of thick white and black stripes. He wrapped it around her neck, expertly looping it at the front. "This is from my old college at Oxford." Julia smiled. "I like it." "It suits you. I found something else, too." Gabriel held up an old blanket that looked oddly familiar. Julia reached out her hand to trace the edge of it. "Is that the one?" "I think so. But it won't be warm enough, so I brought two more." He took her hand and led her out to the porch. It was colder now and dark, but somehow it seemed as if no time had passed since Julia took Gabriel's hand and followed him into the woods. She inhaled sharply at the memory, and as they crossed the backyard in the inky darkness, she felt her heart beginning to pound in her chest. Gabriel squeezed her hand. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "You're nervous. I can tell. Talk to me." He let go of her hand and wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. He hugged his waist and returned. "The last time I was in these woods, I got lost. You have to promise that you won't leave me." "Julianne, I'm not going to leave you. You don't understand how important you are to me. I can't even imagine what it would be like to lose you." The pitch of Gabriel's voice changed. It was low, tense. His declaration took her by surprise. "If for some reason we get separated, and I want you to wait for me, I'll find you. I promise." Gabriel pulled a flashlight out of his pocket, and it shone brightly, illuminating the well-worn path in front of them, which disappeared into the trees. The woods were spooky at night, a mixture of lush pines and naked trees wanting for spring. Julia clutched at Gabriel's waist more tightly, worried that she might trip over a root or something and go sprawling. When they arrived at the edge of the orchard, he stopped. It seemed smaller than Julia remembered. The grassy space looked the same, and the rock and the apple trees were the same, but not as large and significant as they were in her memory, and sadder, as if everything had been forgotten. Gabriel led her to the spot that was theirs all those years ago, and painstakingly spread the old blanket on the ground. "Who bought Richard's house?" she asked. "What's that?" "I was just wondering about who bought the house. Tell me it wasn't Mrs. Roberts. She always wanted it." Gabriel pulled her to sit next to him on the ground and draped them both in blankets. He curled into his side and he wrapped his arms about her. "I bought it." "Really? Why?" "I wasn't going to allow Mrs. Roberts to live here and chop down all the trees." "So you bought the house because of the orchard?" "I couldn't stand the idea of someone else owning it and possibly destroying it, of never being able to come back here." "So what will you do?" He shrugged. "My real estate agent will rent it out. I'd like to keep it as a summer home. I don't know. I just couldn't let Richard sell it to a stranger." "It was very generous of you." "Money means nothing. I can never repay him." Julia pressed a kiss to his cheek. He smiled at her. "Are you comfortable?" "Yes." "Are you warm enough?" He giggled. "You're generating quite a bit of heat, so yes." "You're too far away." Even in the moonlight, Julia could see his eyes grow dark. He scooted closer to him and trembled slightly as he placed her sideways on his lap. "That's better," he whispered, pulling her peacoat up slightly so that he could touch the naked skin of her lower back. "Can I ask you something?" Julia looked at him pensively. "Of course." "Why isn't your last name Clark?" He sighed. "Emerson was my mother's name. I thought if I changed it, it would be disowning her. And I'm not a Clark, not really." They were quiet for a few minutes, each coming to terms with the memories and reality. Gabriel continued to caress her back as she nuzzled up against him. He didn't seem to be in a hurry to start a conversation, so Julia decided to speak first. "I had a crush on you from the moment I saw your picture. I was so surprised that you noticed me that night I met you, that you wanted me to come with you." He brushed his lips against hers, just for an instant, fanning the flames that flickered below the surface. "You appeared to me in my darkness. You asked me once why I didn't sleep with you that night. It was so clear to me now. I drank in your goodness, and it satisfied my longings." Julia would have looked away, embarrassed, but Gabriel's vulnerable gaze kept her there, exploring the depths of the two dark, shadowy pools. "I don't remember everything, but I remember thinking that you were very beautiful. Your hair, your face, your mouth. Sonnets could be written about your mouth, Julianne. I ached to kiss it from the moment I saw you." Julia pressed their chests together and grasped his neck with both hands, urging his mouth forward. She kissed him slowly, but with feeling, tugging on his lower lip with her teeth, exploring his mouth with her tongue. He placed his large hands flush against her back, almost lifting her. She responded by shifting her legs and moving to straddle him. He groaned in her mouth at their sudden and intense connection and held her even more tightly. His hands began to rub against her flesh, gliding up to the edge of her lacy bra strap and then back down again to the waistband of her jeans, teasing and tracing the barriers of her skin. It was so smooth, so soft. He wished he could see it in the moonlight. He wished he could see all of her. Gabriel pulled away from her mouth when he felt her shiver. "Are you all right, love?" He started at the unfamiliar term, but then the slow smile crept across her face. "More than all right. She paused and shook her head. "What is it?" "You're very intense." Without thinking, Gabriel threw his head back and laughed. His chest vibrated with good humor, and Julia almost found herself laughing too. He hadn't thought he was laughing at her. She hadn't thought he was laughing at her. He reached his thumb up to pull her lower lip from between her teeth. If you think my actions are intense, then it's a good thing you don't know what I'm thinking about at this moment. He shifted underneath her, and if she hadn't noticed before, she noticed now. There were two bodies pressed up against one another, where there was where there were two bodies pressed up against one another, there was solidity and heat, the promise of something mysterious and satisfying. She flushed at the way his body responded to her, but didn't break eye contact. Tell me. I want to make love to you because I care about you. I want to worship your naked body with my own and learn all the secrets. I want to please you, not for minutes, but for hours and even days. I want to see you arch your back in ecstasy and look into your eyes when I make you come. He sighed and shook his head, his gaze heated but resolute. But not here. It's too cold and it's your first time and there are some things we need to discuss first. He tenderly kissed her forehead, worried that she would interpret his declaration as a rejection. I want you to feel safe and comfortable. I want to adore every part of you, and that's going to take some time. And, it's going to require more amenities than this field can offer. He smiled at her seductively and cocked an eyebrow at her. Of course, what I want is of very little consequence. What is at issue is what you want. I think my feelings are pretty clear. Are they? His voice sounded unsure. He leaned up to kiss him, but caught his chin instead of his lips. I wouldn't be here with you in cold weather. I didn't want to be. It's still nice to hear. Gabriel Emerson, I want you, he breathed. In fact, He bit down on her lip roughly to keep saying the four-letter word. You can say it, he whispered. It will be all right. Say what you feel. I I want you to be my first. I'm yours, Gabriel. You want me. I want nothing more. This time he captured her mouth. His kiss was filled with promise and resolve. The intensity set fire to Julia's insides, stirring and swirling her desires. Gabriel wanted her. It had always been there in his kiss, but the line between hunger and affection was so easily misread. He was no longer concerned with that line. It was just his body pressed up against hers and their two mouths connected while their hands gently explored one another. In their orchard, which was paradise, there was only two almost lovers and no one and nothing else. As their kisses grew more passionate, Gabriel slowly reclined backward onto the blanket, pulling her until he was flat and she was kneeling on either side of him. Her chest pressed against his, and a pleasant friction arose between their hips. He moved atop him, aimlessly, pressing her softness and curves against him. It was like nothing she had ever felt before. He allowed her to continue, but only for a moment or two. He freed her lips and traced her cheekbones with his thumb, lightly back and forth, his gaze heated. I burn for you, Julianne. But it's more than just a physical hunger. I crave you, all of you. He sighed and shook his head. I hate to do this, but there are a few things we need to discuss. Julia's sigh matched his. Such as? Such as my trip to Italy. Should have told you first. He sat up slowly. Professors travel for work, I know that. He dropped her gaze to the blanket beneath them. Gabriel sat up too. Julianne. He lifted her chin with a single finger. Don't hide from me. Tell me what you were thinking. She twisted her hands together. I know I don't have any right to do. I know I don't have any right to be demanding, but it hurt to find out that Richard knew about your trip before I did. You have every right to be demanding. I am your boyfriend. Should have told you first. You my boyfriend? She whispered. I am more than that. I am your lover. Gabriel's words and his slow and sensual sent a shiver up her spine. Even though we aren't having sex, lovers are intimate with one another in many different ways. But you need to know that I desire all intimacy with you and only you. The term boyfriend is inadequate, and I am very sorry I hurt your feelings. My trip to Italy came up when Richard and I discussed the house because it affected our arrangements. I received the invitation from the Uffizi months ago, long before. Excuse me, guys. I received the invitation from the Uffizi months ago, long before you came to Toronto. I wanted to bring it up, but I was putting it off until we were more comfortable with one another. I wanted your Christmas gift to be a trip to Florence. Of course, I don't want to go alone. The thought of leaving you behind, of being separated from you is. His voice grew rough. I was worried you'd refuse and you would think it was a tool of seduction. She frowned at him. Do you really want me to go with you? I'd rather not go if you won't accompany me. He smiled widely and kissed him. Thank you for the invitation. I accept. Gabriel smiled in relief and buried his face in her hair. After what happened with the clothes, I was convinced you'd say no. I'll book separate accommodations if you wish, and I'll book you an open ticket so you can leave if you decide. Gabriel, I said yes, with all my heart. I could think of no one I'd rather visit Florence with, and please let me stay with you. She looked at him shyly. The semester will be over. We wouldn't be breaking the rules if you were to decide to take me to your bed and make me yours. He cut her off with a searing kiss. Are you sure? Are you sure that you want me to be your first? He gazed at him earnestly. It was always you, Gabriel. I never wanted anyone else. You were the man I've been waiting for. She initiated a soft kiss that quickly escalated. Within moments, she was lying on top of him, their bodies flushed together. She was so close to him, to everything, and she never wanted to be closer, not even during their tango in the museum. He pulled back, panting, dragging his lips down her neck, carefully avoiding her love bite from earlier. He brushed a kiss against her hair. Julia moaned and wrapped her hair around his fingers. Julia moaned and wrapped his hair around her fingers. Makes a little more sense. It's too dangerous, love. I can't kiss you the way I would like to and be able to stop. Despite his despite his protestations, his hands protestation. What the hell is wrong? Yeah, I've decided I'm not editing this. You guys are gonna hear this warts and all. I barely have time to record these. I'm sorry. You're gonna have to deal with it. Yeah, you know you like me. Despite his protestations, his hands ran tantalizing courses up and down the curves of her bottom and over the flare of her hips, teasing and pressing into her. Julia tried to kiss him again, but he caught her face with his hand, stroking her gently. Too much of that, and I'll have you right here, he whispered. You deserve better. You deserve everything. That's what I'm going to give you. He leaned into his hand. Given your decision, there are a few other things we should discuss. Gabriel's voice was no longer playful or sultry. He cleared his throat and took a couple of deliberate deep breaths. If you choose to go on the pill, or if you are already on it, that's fine, but I need to tell you that contraception is unnecessary. I don't understand. Can't have children, Julianne. He blinked at him. Are children something you... Are children all something you always wanted? Maybe I should have brought this up sooner, he shifted somewhat anxiously. She paused at his revelation and began She paused as his revelation began to sink in. I didn't exactly come from a happy family. There have been times when I thought it might be nice to have a husband and a baby, but I never really thought something like that would work out for me. Why not? She shrugged and averted her eyes. I never thought I'd find someone who could love me. I'm not exactly sexy. I'm shy and weak. Oh, Julia. He embraced her and kissed her on both cheeks. You are wrong. You are incredibly sexy. You are far from. He fingered the lapel of his leather jacket for a moment. I'm sorry to hear that you can't have children. Lots of couples have trouble conceiving. Gabriel stiffened. Their situations are completely different. How so? Their infertility is natural. Julia noticed Gabriel's eyes narrowed as he watched her. Wait. Julia noticed Gabriel's eyes narrow as he watched her with a very worried expression. She raised a hand to his face and gently touched his cheek. Were you very disappointed when you found out? He grasped her wrist and removed her hand from his face. I was relieved, Julianne, and I didn't find out. Then how? I made the decision to have myself sterilized when I came out of rehab. He swallowed hard. Oh, Gabriel, why? Because someone like me shouldn't reproduce. I told you about my father. I told you what I was like when I was doing drugs. I thought it would be irresponsible to leave open any kind of paternity. So I had it taken care of, and I will not have it reversed. I decided that there would be no children for me ever. He turned his piercing gaze on her. I didn't account for you, though, and now I almost regret my decision, but really, Julie, it's better this way. Trust me. His body suddenly tensed, as if he were preparing himself for an onslaught. You might decide it would be best not to get involved with me now. Gabriel, please, I just need a minute. Julia moved to sit beside him as she tried to process the information he'd given her. Gabriel followed suit, tugging on one of the blankets so that it was wrapped around her entirely. She realized that he had given her a half admission that the true secret was the event or events that led to this despair. Those events had to be more than just his upbringing and his drug use. Does it matter? The secret he could tell me that would keep him. He was as still as a statue in the cascading moonlight, awaiting her response. The minutes seemed like hours to him. I love him. Nothing he could say could kill that. Nothing. I'm so sorry, Gabriel. She flung her arms around his neck. But I still want you. I realize there might come a time when we revisit this conversation, but I'll accept what you've said for now. At first he was taken aback by her reaction. That her gentle acceptance overwhelmed him. It made it difficult for him to find the right words. Julia, I need to tell you who I am. What I. He was suddenly insistent. Listen to whatever you have to say, but I still want you. As always, you. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently, as if his soul was begging to be joined. Always you, Julia. Only you. He held her and breathed in her comfort. All of a sudden, he could see the future. He had hope. He had faith that maybe, just maybe, when she knew everything, she would look at him with those big brown eyes and say that she still wanted him. You love her. Once again that voice came out of nowhere. Only this time Gabriel recognized it. He silently whispered his thanks. You seem so far away, love. Julia smiled as she used his new term. He kissed her softly. I'm right where I want to be. Perhaps tonight isn't the best night to share all of our secrets, but I can't take you to Italy without telling you everything. And I would like to tell and I would like you to tell me everything too. He looked into her eyes with a very serious expression. I can't ask you to bare your body to me without asking you to bare your soul. I want to do the same with you. I hope you understand. With his eyes, he tried to express his feelings, how he was thinking only of her and adding this prerequisite. She nodded slowly in agreement. He pressed their lips together, and Julia sighed, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady, contented rhythm of his heart. Time passed or stood still, two almost lovers entwined beneath a dark November sky, the stars and moonlight their only illumination. The next morning, Julia awoke early and walked down the hallway to take a shower. She dressed and packed her suitcase, knocking on Gabriel's door at 8 o'clock, but there was no answer. She pressed the curve of her ear against the door and listened. There was no movement, no sound. She dragged her rolling bag down the hallway and carried it down the stairs. As she turned the corner into the living room, she saw Richard and Rachel sitting on one of the sofas. Rachel was crying, and her father was trying to comfort her. Their eyes flew to Julia's as she dropped her bag accidentally. She apologized profusely. It's all right, Julia, Richard greeted her. How did you sleep? Well, well, thank you. Rachel, are you okay? Her friend wiped her eyes. I'm fine. Why don't you two talk while I make some breakfast? Rachel likes her blueberry pancakes, Julia. How about you? He stood up and gestured toward the kitchen. Thanks, but my dad asked me to meet him at Kinfolk's for breakfast at 9. I'll drive you. Just let me whip up some pancakes first. Richard disappeared and Julia sat next to Rachel on the couch, putting her arm around her friend's shoulders. What happened? I had a fight with Aaron. He was moody this morning, so I asked him what was wrong. He started talking about the wedding and wondering if I was ever going to set a date. When I said I wanted to wait, he wanted to know how long. She threw up her hands in frustration. I told him what I said before. I don't know. Then he asked if I wanted him to let me out of the engagement. Julia inhaled sharply at surprise. We never fight. But he was so upset that he couldn't even look at me. Then in the middle of our conversation, he just walked out the front door and drove away. I have no idea where he went or if he's even coming back. Rachel sobbed. Julia hugged her friend tightly. Of course he's coming back. I'm sure he was upset with himself for fighting with you. Went for a drive to cool off. Dad overheard us, so of course he wanted to know why I was delaying the wedding. She wiped her eyes with her hands. He said Aaron was right. I couldn't put my life on hold. He said that Mom would be upset if she knew I was putting things off because of her. Rachel's face crumpled as her eyes filled with more tears. Your dad is right. You both deserve to be happy. Aaron loves you so much he just wants to get married. He's worried you got cold feet. I don't have cold feet. I've loved him forever. Then tell him that. He took you to an island to reconnect with you. He's been patient about everything. I'm sure he doesn't care when the wedding is. He just wants to set a date. Rachel sniffled sadly. I had no idea how upset he was. Maybe you should eat some breakfast, then call him. He'll have calmed down by then, and you two can go somewhere and talk. You can't work things out here with so many people around. Rachel shuddered. Thank God Scott didn't walk in on us. He would have sided with me and pissed Aaron off even more. At that moment, the front door opened and closed, and a tall, brown-haired man, sweaty from jogging, strolled into the living room. His hair was messy and damp, and he was wearing a black Nike jogging suit. As he approached the two women, he took a pair of earbuds out of his ears and pressed a button on his iPhone. He looked at Rachel and Julia, frowning darkly. What happened? Aaron and I had a fight. More tears fell from Rachel's cheeks, leaving Gabriel stricken. He walked over and pulled her into a hug, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I'm sorry, Rach, where is he? He left. He suddenly shook his head in frustration. It pained him to see his sister cry. Before he could ask for more details, Richard emerged from the kitchen, announcing that breakfast was served. Uh, and Julia, if you could give me a few minutes, I'll take you to the kinfolks. Gabriel released Rachel. What's happening? Julia needs to meet with her father at 9. Gabriel looked at his watch. It's not even 8:30. That's okay. I could just have a cup of coffee at the restaurant and wait for him. Julia avoided Gabriel's gaze. He didn't want to be inconvenienced. Let me shower and I'll drive you. I have to stop by my real estate agent's house anyway. Julia nodded, and the three of them entered the kitchen while Gabriel went upstairs. Over blueberry pancakes, Rachel produced something from her purse and fastened it around Julia's neck. She touched the pearl necklace with surprise. What's this? They were Mom's. We wanted you to have something of hers. Aunt Rachel, you should have them. I have other things, she said, smiling. But Scott. Rachel giggled. Scott said they weren't his style. We wanted you to have them. Richard looked at her kindly. You sure? Of course. Rachel hugged her friend, grateful for the opportunity to return her kindness in some tangible way. Julia was overwhelmed, but she fought back tears for Richard's sake. Thank you. Thank you both. He pressed a fatherly kiss to the top of her head. Grace would have been so happy to see you wearing something of hers. I should thank Scott. Rachel rolled her eyes and stifled a snort. He won't be up till noon. Aaron and I have to turn the stereo on last night to block out the sounds of his snoring. We could hear him through the walls. She looked up into her father's slightly disapproving face. Sorry, Dad, but it's the truth. Anyway, just bring your dad to dinner tomorrow night, Julia, and you'll be able to thank Scott then. Julia nodded, fingering the pearls thoughtfully, marveling at the smooth, spherical. Gabriel and Julia didn't say much on the drive to the restaurant. Almost all the words they needed to speak had already been spoken. They held hands like teenagers in the car. Julia beamed when Gabriel gave her his Magdalen College scarf and said that he wanted her to have it. When they arrived at the restaurant, Tom's truck was nowhere to be found. Yes, we're lucky, Julia sounded relieved. He'll have to be told eventually. I'll tell him if you wish. Julia turned her head to see if he was serious. He was. He told me to stay away from you. He thinks you're a criminal. And you should let me tell him. You've taken enough abuse to last a lifetime. Gabriel, my father never abused me. He isn't a bad man, he's just misguided. Gabriel rubbed his mouth but said nothing. I'm not going to say anything until we're back in Toronto and the semester is over. It'll be easier to explain on the phone, but I should go. He'll be here any minute. Gabriel kissed her lightly, caressing her cheek with the back of his hand. Call me later. I will. She kissed him again and slipped out of the Jeep. He pulled her luggage out of the back and placed it at her feet, leaning forward to whisper in her ear. I'm already fantasizing about our first time. I'm already fantasizing about our first time. Julia blushed and murmured, Me too. Tom Mitchell was a man of few words. He was incredibly average looking, of medium height and build, and medium brown hair and rather medium brown eyes. Despite his failure as a father and whatever failures he'd been guilty of as a husband, he was a dedicated volunteer and very active in municipal life. In fact, he enjoyed an excellent reputation amongst the townsfolk of Selinsgrove, and his opinion was frequently sought after in all matters municipal. To Tom's credit, he and Julia spent an enjoyable day together. The regulars at Kinfolk's restaurant welcomed her gladly, and he was able to brag to them about how well she is doing in graduate school, and how she was applying to Harvard for her Ph.D. He took her for a drive around town to see some of the new building projects, pointing out how Selinsgrove had grown even during her short absence, and he brought her to a first aid training session that was being hosted at the firehouse so that his colleagues could tell her about her old dad. About, uh, that his colleagues could tell her how much her old man talked about her. Afterward, they went grocery shopping. Because for various reasons, Tom didn't keep a lot of food in the house. Later that afternoon, he skipped the football game so that they could watch an old movie together. Yes, it was the director's cut of Blade Runner, but it was a film that they both wanted to see, and they quite enjoyed. When it was over, Julia handed him a beer, thus encouraging him to watch football while she made Grace's famous chicken Kiev for dinner. Finally alone, she sent a short text to Gabriel. Gee, just making Grace's chicken Kiev with a lemon meringue pie for Dad. He's watching football. Hope you're having a great day. I'll call you around 6:30. Or Julia, XO. A few minutes later, while Julia was in the middle of assembling two casseroles of chicken Kiev, one for that evening and one for Tom to freeze, her iPhone chirped with an incoming text. My Julia, I missed you. We're watching football too. R and A have kissed and made up and set a date. Richard is something of a miracle worker, I think, or perhaps it was you. You don't know what it means to me to hear you say that you are mine. Looking forward to your call. Yours, Gabriel, XO. Julia fairly floated in the kitchen, buoyed as she was by Gabriel's words and the moments they shared the previous night. Her dream was coming true. After years of dreaming, Gabriel was going to be her first. All the tears and trouble and the humiliation with Simon were now forgotten. She'd waited for that man she loved, and now she was going to have the first time she always desired. And in Florence, of all places. She had many things to be thankful for, including the string of pearls around her neck. She was pretty sure that Grace had had a hand in it. She silently whispered her thanks. When she was finished with her preparation, Julia placed one of the casseroles of chicken Kiev in the oven and walked the second one down to the basement. On opening the freezer, she was surprised to find a lot of pre-made meals, stored in Tupperware or wrapped up in tinfoil, many of which had little notes on them signed Love Deb. Julia resisted the urge to gag at the sight of them. Deb Lundy was a nice lady, and she seemed to take good care of Tom, but her daughter Natalie was another story. Julia couldn't even fathom how upset she would be if Deb and Tom decided to move in together, or God forbid, get married. That would be disturbing on more than one. Julia pushed all the thoughts of Deb and Natalie aside and devoted her full attention to preparing her father's favorite dessert, which was lemon meringue pie. He tended to prefer the pie that was served at kinfolks, but that didn't stop Julia from making her own. She was just putting the pie into the oven when the telephone rang. Tom answered it and within seconds was cursing loudly. After a few brief sentences that sounded work related, he slammed the phone into the cradle and disappeared. When he returned, he had changed into his uniform. Jules, I've got to go. What happened? There's a fire over at the bowling alley. The guys are already there, but they think it might be arson. Festival? How? That's what I'm going to find out. I don't even know when I'll be back. He was almost to the door when he stopped and hunched his shoulders. I'm sorry I ruined your dinner. I was looking forward to it. See you later. Julia watched her father back out of the driveway in his truck, drive away. No doubt Gabriel was already in the middle of dinner with his family, so Julia decided against texting him. She would wait until 6:30 and call him as planned. When the timer went off, she removed the pie from the oven and inhaled the sweet, citrusy aroma. While she waited for it to cool, she wrapped the chicken Kiev and put it in the refrigerator. It would keep until tomorrow. He'd make a sandwich for. About 15 minutes later, she heard the front door open and close. She hurriedly grabbed the plate so that she could serve Tom a piece of pie. How did you get away so quickly? The pie is ready right now, she called down the highway. I'm glad to hear that, Jules. The sound of that voice, the plate slipped from Julia's fingers, smashing on the linoleum. Chapter 27. Simon walked into the kitchen and paused, leaning against the doorway with his arms folded across his chest. He stared in shock at the handsome face with blue eyes framed by short blonde hair. Julia shrieked and sprang toward the doorway, trying to run around him. His large hand shot out of the door jamb, effectively clotheslining her. He grabbed her. She grabbed on his arm to prevent herself from falling backwards. "Please," she begged, "let me go." "That any way to greet me, after all this time?" He grinned, withdrawing his arm and standing at his full height of 5 feet 11 inches. Julia cowered just inside the doorway, her eyes darting around it nervously. Simon backed her into the kitchen, his medium-sized frame still intimidating. When he'd successfully cornered her, he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her into a tight bear hug. "Simon, put me down," she gasped and squirmed. He squeezed her more tightly, a wicked grin slicing from ear to ear. "Come on, Jules, loosen up." She struggled in his arms. "I have a boyfriend. Let go of me." "I don't care if you have a boyfriend." He brought his face close to her, and Julia feared that he was going to kiss her, but he didn't. He pressed himself against her and allowed his hands to wander, smirking at her discomfort. Eventually, he pulled back. "Wow, still a cold fish. I would have thought your boyfriend would have fixed you." His eyes slithered over her lustfully. "At least I know I'm not missing anything. Although it's still insulting that you'd give up to him and not to me." Julia pulled away from him and sped to the front door, opening it and gesturing outside. "Just go. I don't want to talk to you, and Dad will be back any minute." Simon slowly followed her like a wolf following a lamb. "Don't lie to me. I know he just left. Seems they had a bit of trouble over at the Best Bowl. Someone burned the building to the ground. He'll be gone for hours." Julia blinked nervously. "Do you know?" "I heard it on the radio. I was already in the neighborhood, so it seemed like the perfect time to drop by and see you." She tried to appear calm as she weighed her options. She knew there was no way she could outrun him, and she didn't want to run the risk of angering him by trying. At least if she stayed inside, she had a chance of trying to get her to her cell phone, which was in the kitchen. She plastered a fake smile on her face and tried to sound pleasant. It was nice of you to stop in. Well, we both know it's over. You found someone else, you're happy with her. Let's leave the past behind, okay?" Tried to hide her anxiety, and she did a pretty good job of it, until he came closer and started running both of his hands through her long hair, drawing the strands up his face so that he could sniff them. "I wasn't happy with her. It wasn't about happiness. It was about sex. She isn't the kind of girl I could introduce to my parents. You, on the other hand, were at least presentable, even if you were a disappointment." "I don't want to talk about this." He pulled the door out of her grasp and slammed it shut. "I'm not finished, and I don't like being interrupted." Julia took a cautious step backwards. "Sorry, Simon." "Let's cut the bullshit. You know why I'm here. I want the pictures." "I told you I don't have them." "I don't believe you." He clamped a hand around her neck and yanked her toward him by her necklace. "You really want to play this game with me?" I've seen I've seen what Natalie has. I know those pictures exist. Give them to me now. We'll remain friends, but don't push me. I didn't drive 3 hours to put up with your shit. I don't care how many strands of pearls you wear. You are nothing." He began to tug on the necklace, straining the knots between each pearl. Julia brought her hands up to stop him. "Please don't. This was Grace's." "Oh, this was Grace's. Excuse me. I spent more money on you in a week than they're worth." He tugged the necklace again defiantly. Julia swallowed hard, and he could feel her throat flutter against his fingers. "Natalie is lying. I don't know what her motivation is, but I'm telling you that I left behind all those pictures of you that I had. I have no reason to lie to you. Please, Simon." Simon laughed. "You give an impressive performance, but that's all it is, a performance. I know you were mad at me because of what happened, and I think you took something for revenge. If that's true, then why haven't I used them? Why didn't I send them to a newspaper or ask you for money? Why would I be holding on to them for over a year? It doesn't make sense." He crushed her to him and brought his lips to her ear. "Aren't exactly street smart, Jules. It isn't a stretch for me to believe that you have something that you don't know how to use. Why don't we move this conversation upstairs? I can look around for the pictures, and you could try to put me in a better mood. Threw her earlobe into his mouth, biting it slightly. Julia inhaled and exhaled a couple of times, trying to grasp at any courage she could summon. Looked up at his cold blue eyes. Not doing anything until you take your hands off me. Can't you be nice? Simon's eyes darkened momentarily. Oh, I'll be nice. Started petting her cheek. I expect something in return, and if I don't leave here with pictures, I'll have to leave here with something else. So, you should start thinking about what you could smile on my face. Julia cringed. Things have certainly changed, haven't they? I'm really going to enjoy this. Pulled her into his arms and pressed his open, eager mouth to hers. At 6:30 sharp, Gabriel excused himself from the dining room table and walked into the living room, readying himself to receive Julia's call. The call never came. He checked his voicemail. No messages from Julia. No text from Julia. No emails either. 10 minutes to 7, he dialed the cell phone, and after a few rings, his call went to voicemail. Julianne, are you there? Call me. He ended the call and used the White Pages application on his iPhone to find Tom's home number. It rang and rang and rang. The answering machine. He hung up without leaving a message. Why isn't she answering the phone? Where is she? Where's Tom? A dreadful suspicion took hold in his mind. Not wanting to waste a single second, Gabriel stormed out the front door without speaking to anyone. He started the Jeep and sped all the way over to Tom's house, trying again and again to reach Julia or Tom on the way. And if a policeman stopped him for speeding, so much the better. Simon's victory was so close he could taste it. He knew Julia wasn't a strong person, and he was accustomed to using her weakness to his advantage. When she looked him in the eye and pleaded with him to believe that she didn't have the photographs, he believed her. It was far more likely that Natalie was setting her up, trying to deflect attention from her vindictive games. As Julia, as he held Julia in his arms once again, he gave up the quest for the pictures. Now he was on an entirely different mission. Undeterred by the ringing of the telephone in the kitchen, which alternated with a few bars of Message in a Bottle, as played by Julia's iPhone, Simon continued kissing her, pulling her so that she was straddling him, and as he sat on her father's couch. She was still frigid. She was tolerating his advances, but barely, her arms and body limp. He never liked his tongue in her mouth. She never really liked anything of his in her mouth, and even now she squirmed in his arms. But her discomfort excited him, and when he slid his tongue over and around her, he felt his arousal grow and strain against. He kissed her until she screwed up the courage to push against his chest with her fists, and he knew it was time to move on to other activities. As he began to unbutton her shirt, she struggled. Please don't do this, she whimpered. Please let me go. You're going to like it, he chuckled, and he leaned around to cup her ass, kneading and groping it while he was trying to escape from his lap. She tried to escape from his lap. I'm going to make sure you enjoy it, then I'll let you go. He dragged his mouth across her jawline and down to the left side of her neck, sucking on a patch of skin near the middle of her throat, above the pearls. I don't think you want a repeat of our last fight, do you, Julia? She trembled. Julia? No, Simon. Good. Since his eyes were closed, he missed the obvious love bite on the right side of her neck. It wouldn't have mattered. He'd already planned on marking her. A nice bite mark so that her boyfriend back in Canada would see that his little girlfriend had been up to. A mark that would even the score between the two of them. He to vacuumed her blood up to the surface of her skin for good measure, sank his teeth into it. She cried out in pain. He licked the skin softly, enjoying her taste, salty and sweet and bloody and Julia. When he was finished, he moved back to admire his handiwork. She'd have to wear a turtleneck to cover it up, and he knew that Julia did not like turtlenecks. The mark was monstrous, angry and red. It showcased his large ring of teeth. It was perfect. Julia looked up at him through her impossibly long lashes, and he watched something shift in her eyes. He leaned forward in anticipation and licked his lips. Suddenly her palm connected with his cheek in a vicious slap. In a flash, Julia flew to the staircase to escape to the second floor. "You fucking bitch!" Simon roared as he followed, easily catching up to her. Just before he reached the top stair, he caught her ankle with both hands and twisted. She collapsed on her knees, shrieking in pain. "I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget," he said, moving to grab her by her hair. She howled as he yanked her head backward. Flailing madly, she kicked at him furiously, and her uninjured foot miraculously made contact with his groin, releasing his grip from her hair and sending him careening down the stairs. She hobbled up to her bedroom and locked the door behind her while he doubled over in pain. "Wait till I get my hands on you, you bitch," he shouted, clasping his crotch with both hands. Julia braced her bedroom door with a chair and tugged on the nearby dresser. Old framed photographs clattered against one another on top of the antique as she tried to move it, while a china doll crashed to the floor. Ignoring the pain in her now injured ankle, she hobbled to the other side of the dresser, pushing it frantically with short, desperate attempts. Simon shouted expletives at her as he wrestled with the doorknob. Finally, she managed to place the dresser in front of the door. She only hoped she could buy herself enough time to make a phone call before Simon came bursting into the room. She limped over to the telephone. It sat on her nightstand, but in her haste she knocked it to the floor. "Shit!" She picked up the phone and with her trembling fingers began dialing Gabriel's cell phone. It immediately went to voicemail. As she waited for the beep, Simon's body came hurtling against the door. Julia watched in horror as the old door sagged and began to come away from its hinges. "Gabriel, please come to my dad's house right away. Simon is here and he's trying to break down the door to my room." Simon cursed and growled, pounding relentlessly against the door. Once he smashed his way in, he tipped the dresser over to get to her. "This is it. I'm dead," she thought. She couldn't imagine a scenario in which she escaped without sustaining serious bodily harm or worse. Realizing that she couldn't wait another second, she dropped the phone, opened the window, preparing to crawl out onto the roof and possibly to jump. Just as she was trying to swing herself over the windowsill, she saw Gabriel's Jeep screech into the driveway. He left the car running and tore across the lawn. Gabriel shouted her name and Simon swore at him. Light, quick footfalls reverberated from the staircase, followed by the sounds of flesh hitting flesh and torrents of curses. Something heavy fell to the floor. Someone tumbled down the stairs. Julia crept over to her nearby destroyed door, straining to hear. The noises seemed to have moved outside. When she limped back to the window, she saw Simon lying on the front lawn. He was cursing and holding his nose. She watched breathlessly as he lurched to his feet, blood pouring down his face. The blink of an eye, blood from Simon's nose mingled with the blood from his mouth as Gabriel's right hook split his lip, dislodging a few teeth. "Asshole!" Simon spat out the teeth and lunged at Gabriel. Despite his obvious impairment, he was able to land a punch on Gabriel's chest. Gabriel reeled back, winded. Simon took another step forward, eager to capitalize on his opponent's weakness. Gabriel recovered quickly, plowing into Simon's stomach with his right and his left. Simon doubled over in pain and fell to his knees. Gabriel straightened his shoulders slowly and cracked his neck to one side. He looked remarkably relaxed in his tweed jacket and Oxford shirt. He looked as if he was on his way to a faculty meeting at the university and not presently kicking the ass of a senator's son from Philadelphia. "Get up," Gabriel said in a voice that made Julia's blood cool. Simon moaned, "I said get up." Gabriel stood over him like an avenging angel, beautiful and terrible and absolutely without mercy. When Simon didn't move, Gabriel grabbed a fistful of his hair, jerking his head back. If you even think about going near her again, I'll kill you. The only reason you're still alive is because it would upset Julianne to see me go to prison, and I'm not about to leave her alone after what you did to her. You sick motherfucker. A photograph or video of someone who even looks like her ends up on the internet or in the newspaper, I'll come after you. I've gone 10 rounds with a few Southies in Boston and lived to brag about it. So don't think about so don't think that I will hesitate to smash your skull in next time. Gabriel reared back and his left uppercut shattered Simon's jaw. Simon slumped onto the ground and remained perfectly still. Pulling a handkerchief out of his pocket of his wool trousers, Gabriel nonchalantly wiped the blood from his hands. At that moment, Julia appeared at the front door and hobbled out to meet him. Julia. He caught her in his arms as she nearly fell down the stairs. Are you okay? He swung her around to the ground carefully, clasping her to his chest. Julia. He pushed her hair back so he could see her. Her lips were red and swollen. There were scratches on her neck. Her eyes were wild. And was that a huge bite mark? That animal fucking bit her. Are you all right? Did he? Gabriel dropped his eyes to her clothing, fearing what he might see. But no, her clothing wasn't ripped and she was still dressed mercifully, even though her skirt was unbuttoned. He closed his eyes and thanked God that he hadn't arrived any later. Who knows what he would have done, what he would have found. Come with me, he said firmly, removing his jacket and placing it around her shoulder. He quickly buttoned up her shirt and carried her to the passenger seat of the jeep, closing the door behind her. What happened? He asked as he climbed in beside her. Julia was clutching her injured ankle and muttering to herself. Julia? When she didn't respond, he reached over to brush the hair out of her eyes. He flinched toward the door. He froze. Julia, it's me, Gabriel. I'm going to take you to the hospital, all right? She gave no indication that she'd heard him, and she was shaking or crying. She's in shock, he thought. Gabriel pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Richard, something happened to Julia. He paused and looked over at her. Her old boyfriend appeared and attacked her. I'm taking her to the hospital in Sunbury. Yes, you can meet us if you want to. See you there. Gabriel looked over at Julia, hoping she would make eye contact. Richard is going to meet us at Sunbury. He's going to call a friend of his, who is a doctor. When Julia didn't respond, he dialed information to find the number for the Selins Grove fire station. He left an urgent message for Tom, explaining what had happened and that he was taking Julia to the hospital. It's her goddamn father's fault. Why the fuck did he leave her by herself? I slapped him. Julia's voice, high and unnatural, broke into his thoughts. You what? He kissed me. Slapped him. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. I didn't want to kiss him. At that terrible moment, Gabriel was grateful that he had to drive her to the hospital. Without his need to care for her, he would have turned around and finished Simon off permanently. She began to say the most bizarre things. She was murmuring about him kissing her, and something about Natalie, and then something about him, Gabriel, not wanting her anymore because she'd been marked, and she was going to be a lousy lay. What the fuck did he do to her? Shh, Beatrice, look at me, Beatrice. Shh, Beatrice, look at me, Beatrice. It took a moment for the old nickname to sink in, but when it did, she looked at him, her frantic eyes slowly focusing on his face. This isn't your fault, okay? It isn't your fault that he kissed you. I didn't mean to cheat on you. I'm so sorry, she whispered. The tone of her voice, the panic in her eyes, Gabriel swallowed back bile. Julian, you didn't cheat on me, all right? And I'm glad you hit him. He deserved it, and much, much worse. Gabriel shook his head, wondering with horror what had actually happened before his arrival. When Richard arrived at the hospital, he found his son and Julia in the waiting room. Gabriel was stroking her hair and speaking to her softly. It was a tender scene, but the level of intimacy between the two of them surprised him greatly. While they waited for Richard's friend to arrive, he gently examined her ankle. She yelped. Richard glanced sideways at Gabriel, who was gnawing on his knuckles and control his reactions. I don't think your ankle is broken, but it's certainly injured. Gabriel, why don't you get us all a cup of tea or maybe some cookies? Gabriel pulled his knuckles out of his mouth. I won't leave her. It will just take a minute. I want to speak to Julia. Damn it, dog! Close the door! Don't just leave it. Dogs have no respect for recording. And he made me lose my damn place. It'll just take a moment. I want to speak to Julia. Gabriel nodded reluctantly and disappeared in the direction of his cafeteria. Richard couldn't help but notice her neck. The bite mark was obvious, the love bite less so. His eyes flickered to where his son had stood for a moment. Love bite was old, obviously from a day or two ago. Clearly, things between Gabriel and Julia were more intimate than he thought. Grace used to volunteer at this hospital. You know that? Julia nodded. Over the years, she served in a lot of capacities, but most of her work was with the victims of domestic abuse, he sighed. She saw a lot of sad cases, some of which involved children. Some of her cases ended in fatalities. He looked into Julia's eyes. I will tell you what Grace used to tell her patients. This is not your fault. It doesn't matter what you did or what you didn't do. You do not deserve this. And at this moment, I don't know when I've been more proud of my son. He looked down at her injured ankle and remained silent. A moment later, a pleasant-looking Asian gentleman walked up to them. Richard, he said, extending his hand. Richard sprang to his feet, shaking his friend's hand. Stephen, I'd like to introduce you to Julia Mitchell. She's a friend of the family. Julia, this is Dr. Ling. Stephen nodded and directed a nurse to help Julia to an examination. He followed shortly thereafter, assuring Richard that he would treat her as if she were his own daughter. Knowing that Julia was in good hands, Richard decided to walk to the cafeteria to join his son. As he entered the hallway, he could hear Gabriel arguing with Tom Mitchell loudly. I think I'm a better judge of character than you are. Tom was in Gabriel's face, trying to physically intimidate him, but Gabriel met him toe to toe. Well, clearly you aren't, Mr. Mitchell, or I wouldn't have had to drag that animal out of your house before he raped your daughter in your own fucking bedroom. Gentlemen, this is a hospital. Take it outside. Richard was stern as he walked toward them. Tom acknowledged his friend briefly and turned back to Gabriel. Glad Julia's okay. And if you rescued her, then I owe you. I just got a phone call from a police officer telling me you beat the shit out of Senator Talbot's son. How do I know that you didn't start the whole thing? You're the drug addict. I'll take a drug test, Gabriel's eyes flashed. I have nothing to hide. Instead of worrying about the senator's son, don't you think you should be a little more concerned about your daughter? Protecting Julianne was your job, your job as a father, and you have been doing a lousy fucking job of it her whole life. Christ, Tom, how could you have sent her to, back to live with her mother when she was a little girl? Tom clenched his fist so hard that he nearly burst the blood vessels in his hands. You don't know what you're talking about. So you need to shut the hell up. You've got some nerve lecturing me about my daughter. You're just a cokehead with a history of violence. I don't want you anywhere near her or I'll have you arrested. I don't know I don't know what I'm talking about? Come on, Tom, get your head out of your ass. I'm talking about all those men traipsing in and out of her apartment in St. Louis, fucking your ex-wife in front of your little girl. And you did absolutely nothing. In fact, you finally rescue her before she becomes a statistic for child molestation, and then you send her back? Why? Was she a delinquent 9-year-old? Was she too needy? Or were you too busy being volunteer fire chief? Tom looked at Gabriel with an expression of utter hatred. It took all of his self-control to keep from either punching Gabriel's lights out or grabbing his hunting rifle from the truck and shooting him. But he wasn't about to do either around the corner from a waiting room full of witnesses. Instead, he swore at Gabriel a few more times and stomped over to the admissions desk to make arrangements to pay Julia's hospital bill. By the time she returned on crutches, Tom had calmed himself. He stood by the door of the emergency room with his hands in his pockets, swimming in guilt. Gabriel walked to Julia immediately, his eyebrows furrowing when he saw her bandaged ankle. Are you all right? It isn't broken, thank you, Gabriel. I don't know what I would have Julia swallowed her words as tears fell down her face for the first time that evening. Gabriel put his arm around her shoulder and tenderly kissed her forehead. Tom watched the exchange between his daughter and the violent but valiant cokehead and walked over to Richard. The two friends spoke for a moment before they shook hands. Jules, want to come home? Richard says you're welcome to stay at his place if you'd rather. Tom shuffled his feet uncomfortably. Can't go home. Julia pulled away from Gabriel and hugged her father with one arm. He immediately teared up and whispered an apology in her ear before walking out of the hospital. Richard bade the couple goodbye, leaving Julia to dry her tears. Gabriel turned to her immediately. Can we pick up your prescriptions on the way back to Richard's? I'm sure Rachel has some clothes that you can borrow, or I can lend you something, unless you'd rather go home and pack your suitcase. I can't go back there, whimpered, curling in on herself. You won't have to. What about him? You don't have to worry about him anymore. Police have already picked him up. Julia looked into his eyes and almost lost herself in the warmth and concern that radiated from them. I love you, Gabriel. At first he didn't react to her statement. He simply stood there as if he hadn't heard, and his expression softened. Her into his side, crutches and all, and kissed her cheek, saying, "Ooh, that was action-packed, lady. That was that was an emotional roller coaster. That's what that was. It seemed like they were about to give into their intimacy for a minute there, and the whole plan of the trip to Florence, and then things coming to a head with Simon. Oh, good God. This is my channel, so of course I'm going to expound upon my own personal philosophies. Um, so let's put it this way. Uh, this is my opinion toward rapists, and child molesters. They would have to look up to see whale shit, and that is at the bottom of the ocean. All right? There's no room on this planet for people to take advantage of people like that, and especially violently. Violently or not. I mean, it's all violence. If you take somebody against their will, that's violence. And that's disgusting. And I hope every one of those bastards out there that does that shit rot in hell, okay? These are my personal opinions. I flat out loathe anybody who thinks they have the right to take something from someone else like that. That's disgusting. And I will tell you this. For those of you that have listened to my other books that I've read, especially, the 50 Shades books being the other ones, that moment when when Christian came into Jack Hyde's office, he punched him once. Taylor had already beat him up a little bit. See, none of that ever felt as satisfying, I'll be honest, as satisfying as this last chapter did right here, because Gabriel beat the ever-loving shit out of this guy. He beat him. He knocked his ass out cold, broke his jaw, knocked out teeth, left him lying there. That's what I wanted to happen to Jack Hyde, okay? Christian, I mean, he got a lick in, and by the end, Anna had shot him in the leg, but it never was as satisfying. I don't really think that Jack Hyde ever got his comeuppance. Not like Simon just did. Now, I don't think Simon shows back up in this book because I've seen the movies, and I do say movies because it was basically a miniseries for the first book, and I think it's like that for the other two in this trilogy. I think I'm not sure if there's a fourth one I've seen, but I don't know if it figures into this or not. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But as for this, it felt really good reading Gabriel beating the shit out of Simon. I knew it had to happen. I mean, you couldn't just leave it to a phone call. It had to happen. I don't know if there's going to be other repercussions that the son of a bitch is going to come back in the other books. You're going to have to deal with, I think her name is Paulina. It's been a while since I read the beginning of that, but uh, there's going to be strife. There's going to be tension. There's going to be obstacles. Going to be all of that. And I look forward to it. I really do. Now I will say that after I finish Gabriel's Inferno, I'm not going to just jump right into the next Gabriel book. I'm going to read something else in the meantime because I also want to branch out and do more than just romance novels. I also want to do thrillers, fantasy adventure. I'm a huge Dean Koontz fan, and there's so many of Dean Koontz's books that I'd like to read. I actually started one time for a live stream. I started reading the book Twilight Eyes, and I do intend on finishing that at some. I will make a playlist out of that when I get that finished. There's actually not too much left of this, and I hope to try to get more chapters out as these upcoming weeks go by. I hope to really finish this book. As a matter of fact, let me see how many pages I actually have left in this. I'm not counting the acknowledgement. I'm not reading these. Go back. That's the acknowledgements. Looks like it ends page. Okay, next page is 451, and the last page is 545. So I've actually got less than 100 pages to go. So we'll make a good. We'll make some good time with that. We will. But I look forward to coming back and reading some more of this. Please stay tuned and please, folks, be patient. All right, it's a confusing time for me. I just recently lost my brother. Uh, he was only he. It was just a few days before his birthday. He was about to turn 55. So I had planned on reading earlier, but that kind of you know mind wasn't in the right place, and it wouldn't have been fair to you guys. It really wouldn't. Uh, so I'm in a bit of a better place now. So thank you for being patient. Thank you for sticking by. Thank you for your comments. Please hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please do that. Please subscribe. I'd like to get monetized to make this my full-time job, ladies and gentlemen. So, all right, until next time, this is Couch Potato Mike, reminding you that in the end, we're all stories. So let's make them good ones. See you next time, guys.